Hello, this is some old guy in Hawaii, and I was not planning on making any real Borderlands 4 content until actual game release. There are plenty of other more prolific streamers and YouTubers out there picking over the trailers and gameplay reveals with a fine-tooth comb. I am a look at the numbers long-term, do in-depth analysis, and then put something out a few weeks later kind of guy. Okay, until I started watching the gameplay reveal on my own and notice something I don't think anyone else has, or at least hasn't emphasized, and that's this. During the video, we are shown 4 weapon stat cards, each of which has 5 basic stats we've seen before. Damage, accuracy and handling here probably, reload speed, rate of fire, and magazine size. Additionally, however, up here, above everything else, including the weapon name, and in bigger font than any of the other stats, is DPS, or damage per second. This to me is huge. I believe this one new listed stat will subtly but still significantly improve the play and builds and enjoyment of a large percentage of players. And the cool part is, most won't even realize it will happen automatically. Why? What do I mean? Well, first, a bit of history. During the peak of Borderlands 3's life cycle, myself and another content provider, Kylar1700, realized we were both working on the same player aid and joined forces. And we ended up putting out a table that lists the max level 72 Mayhem 10 maximum damage figures for every unique weapon in the game, because people were asking for it for a very long time, and they still are. I was in a stream yesterday when someone running Arms Race asked, what's the max damage for a plasma car? There's a link to the table in the description below. The community asked for it. We obliged. Happy to do it. However, long before that table, and ever since, I have tried very hard to get people to understand that max listed damage is not always the best indicator of superior performance when comparing weapons. And if we use it as our primary criteria for deciding what to keep and what to chuck, we will more often than not choose the poorer performing weapon. Okay, why is that? Well, listed damage is simply the damage done by a single shot from the weapon, a single pull of the trigger, a single report. It does not consider a host of other factors that figure in, the most obvious of which is rate of fire. If I have a gun with a listed damage of 100 and a rate of fire of 7 rounds per second, and another model of the same weapon, different parts, with a listed damage of 120 and a rate of fire of 5 rounds per second, the 100 damage gun will do more damage per second, 700, than the 120 damage weapon, only 600. That's at least until the magazines are empty and we have to reload. That is one simple example where going by max listed damage can hurt rather than help us. But that's also a very simple, rough DPS calculation. True DPS factors in not only listed damage and rate of fire, but also the time it takes to empty that entire magazine and reload. Because while we are reloading, we are not doing any damage. And true DPS becomes more and more important when dealing with increasingly tankier enemies, badasses, mini bosses, bosses, the kind of enemies that can take 3, 4, 7, 10 magazines worth to take down. And all other things being equal, the faster we can take something down, the less likely we are to go down first. So what's the problem? The problem is math. Unless they are nitpicking number freaks like me, most players do not want to do math to figure out which item is better. They want a quick and easy way to make a determination. And so many use max listed damage even when that's often not a good way to do it. And I understand that. I have done videos on the math, but mostly I just tell people to test out a new weapon before throwing away the old one. Make sure the high damage one performs better than the lower one before chucking the latter. Okay, some probably do that, most don't. And I suspect many still end up with a kind of vague buyer's remorse because the new gun just doesn't feel all that better than the old. Okay, but with Borderlands 4, that should not be anywhere near as big of an issue because DPS. The game does the math for us and puts it right up there, up top. Okay, this dataless AR with the shown stats has a listed DPS of 265. I did the math shown here, I'm not going to go over it step by step, and got just about 265. Okay, it's less because listed figures are always rounded off, but the game math utilizes the more precise figures in the game code. I have to use the rounded off figures. In any case, the game does the work for us. Now, I suspect most people, most BO3 Vidians, will stop comparing max listed damage and start comparing DPS. Yeah, this gun has 100 listed damage, while this has 120, but the first one is 700 DPS, the second one's only 600. Guess which I'm choosing, okay? And their choices and their builds and their combat will be all the better for it, and that makes me very, very happy, okay? A couple of caveats. Basic DPS calculations utilize four stats: listed damage, rate of fire, reload speed, and magazine size. There are some other factors that can affect DPS, and they aren't always listed. In BL3, most Dahl and some Hyperion weapons have burst fire capability, and the listed rate of fire reflects the burst and does not consider the pause between bursts. Okay, there's also the charge time for most Molly 1 weapons in that game. Okay, the good news is that at least some of these things appear to be factored in to Borderlands 4 DPS numbers. Okay, the last card in the play demo is for this Ripper shotgun. The listed DPS is 536, but when I did the math using the listed stats, I came up with a value of 604 damage per second. Why? Well, Ripper weapons, when we squeeze the trigger, spool up or charge up like BL3 Melee 1 weapons before the first round leaves the barrel. Okay, I got 604 by dividing this number, the total damage done by emptying all 19 rounds, by the time it takes to empty that magazine and reload. Okay, that combined time is 6.42 seconds. We can also work this the other way. If I have a DPS value of 604 and a total damage figure of 3876, I can divide that big number by 604 and determine that it will take 6.42 seconds to empty the mag and reload. Okay, one firing cycle. If I take that total damage number 3876 and instead divide it by the listed DPS of 536, I get 7.23 seconds, which is what? Well, an educated guess says it's the time it takes to empty the magazine, reload, and then charge back up before the gun starts firing again. Okay, I think it takes 6.42 seconds to empty the mag and reload, and then another 0.81 seconds to charge back up. Now, whether this is in fact what's going on and whether or not other factors are figured into listed DPS remains to be seen. That's really beside the point. Okay, even setting aside additional factors, DPS is a much, much better way to compare weapons than max listed damage. And in Borderlands 4, that will be the norm, and it will become second nature, which is awesome. P.S. I was planning on eventually putting together a Borderlands 4 max damage table. Now it's looking more like a max DPS table. If you like this kind of content and want to see more, you know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe. Stay safe. Thanks for watching.